When do we really think about lure color? When the fishing's tough. We've all got our favorite colors we like to start with, and if the fishing is good, we may stick with that color all day. But when things are difficult, that's when we start switching them out, and there are so many choices. While we don't need to carry as many colors as are offered in our favorite tackle stores, there are some key ideas to think about when putting together your lure collection. Well, what is the process I use to help make this decision? While there are a bazillion variables in bass fishing as to why fish may or may not bite, color can be one of them. Well, there are three factors I keep in mind and make adjustments from there. Number one, how are the bass eating the lure? My end goal is to always have them eat the lure well. In other words, are they just nipping at it or engulfing it? While trying to figure this out, like I mentioned earlier, I'll also explore other variables like cadence and lure speed, but at the end of the day, if those bass just keep barely nipping the bait, and especially if I'm missing some bites, swapping out lure color can be a great decision. But how do we know what color to switch to? Or in other words, is there a plan? And yes, there is, and this is how I decide. This involves factor number two. Am I fishing baits that are fast moving or slow? When fishing baits that are quicker or fast movers or reaction type baits, I try to always think about how far away they can be seen. Bass are extremely visual. For example, white can be seen from quite a distance in about any water clarity. Why? Because it reflects light and doesn't absorb it like darker colors. I have a video about colors in murky water that I will link down below. And when fishing fast moving baits, the bass are not coming up and carefully investigating it like they do with slow movers. So if my favorite color isn't working like I think it should, that is how I decide what to try and switch to for a fast moving bait. How far can it be seen? But what about slow moving baits like a jig or Texas rig dragging along the bottom? For me, factor number three has one of two ways that I can go, and I often interchange them. In water with better visibility, one approach is to go as natural as possible, and we've all heard this a million times. But this is especially true if you have waters that have lots of crayfish in them. These little crustaceans have quite a variety of color patterns. And as an example, there's a small pond not far from here. And remember, I'm in northern Illinois, that is just full of blue crayfish. And I'm assuming they are an invasive species, like maybe the ones that have been found in Texas, or maybe someone dumped an aquarium crayfish into the pond. But it's full of them, and they're bright blue. Anglers in that pond naturally have turned to blue color patterns when fishing that specific body of water. Or if your waters are full of a certain subspecies of panfish, then fishing with those color patterns can be a great approach. Now, the other way that you can go, and I really like to do this, even in clear water, is to think about contrast. Like we talked about earlier, bass are extremely visual, so a high contrast color that stands out against the background can make a noticeable difference in your fishing. And if you have lots of vegetation, picking a color that can be easily seen against that green background can make an immediate impact on how many bites you get. Junebug is a very popular color in waters all over Florida. And if you have ever fished in Florida, you know that those lakes can be slam full of vegetation. Junebug, even though I would still consider it a darker color, does stand out nicely against the variety of backgrounds, including here with just a muck or mud type of a bottom. The idea of focusing on contrast plays off of that natural curiosity of bass. And if you are fortunate enough to be fishing with a friend, wow, you have the perfect opportunity for the two of you to experiment with color options. But remember, the end goal of mine is that when I catch a fish, they take the lure and not just nip at it. That's how I determine if a color change may be needed. And hey, if you want to watch a video that shows how bass will follow fish or prey species offshore and how they actually position against that school of prey species, go ahead and check this one out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.